Hi, welcome to Mr. Otter Studio. Spring is in the air and it is time to go outside and look at all of the beautiful flowers and buds and blossoms that are now starting to appear. Today I'm going to show you how to draw and paint these pink blossoms using watercolors. I'm going to walk you through this step by step so you can draw it with me, you can paint it with me. At any time, of course, you can move ahead, you can pause this video and stop and work on that step. I usually speed up steps. You will learn how to layer your watercolors, how to glaze using them, and also how to make things look like they're transparent. Some of these petals, the sunlight's coming through, and so we can see a shadow of the other petals behind the ones that are in front. You need basic watercolor supplies, watercolor paper, watercolor paints, this round number 10 brush, and then I'm also going to be using this flat brush. You need water, a pencil, make sure you have an eraser if your pencil doesn't have one, paper towel, a scratch piece of paper for testing your paints out on, and I'm going to be using this tape to tape a border. I'm going to add this even though I might not use it, we'll see. You can use a micron pen or a fine tip marker or Sharpie to add some details in the end if you would like. If you're going to tape your border, let's do that first so you can see where the edges of your painting will be. This one is definitely more of a long painting, so I'm going to crop this in even more. So you don't have to do this tape. This tape just basically provides a border and it makes it look nice and finished once you take it off. So there are basically what we're going to be drawing are these 4 different blossoms, and they're kind of anchored in by this branch. So I'm going to be drawing darker so that you can see my drawing, but make sure you are drawing really, really lightly. So this branch starts almost in the middle of your paper, just maybe pushed over to the left side a little bit. And we're just gonna draw it and it's kind of coming at an angle. You're just gonna draw like a tube. And before it gets to the bottom, it's just going to curve a little bit in this direction. So this is just going to anchor our drawing. It's hard to compare things when there's nothing there. And there is a branch, let's just go ahead and draw it. You can just make a triangle in the bottom, and then this is going to be a branch. And you can go ahead and add a little tiny knot here if you'd like. And then there's one branch that's coming out here, and it's going to be what attaches to this one. So it's good to put it in now instead of later, just because it does need to kind of show, because it's like an anchor. Without it, this flower is kind of floating. We're going to start by drawing this blossom that is in the middle of this bunch. And it's close to these branches, so we're just going to kind of draw a circle where it fits in. Comes over this branch up to about here, and then it kind of curves straight down. So it almost is like flat on this side and round on this side. And it's going to come in front of this branch. So we will erase this once we draw this flower in. Let's just draw a circle where the center of this flower would be, and it would be about right here, just so you know where these petals are coming from. And the first petal we're going to draw is this big one, and they're almost the shape of a leaf. It's going to come out, and then you can see where this bends. So you don't want this petal to come over that. And then just bring it back up in. So it should be rounder on this side. It should be rounder as it comes towards the center and more pointed as it comes to the edge. And then there's another one, and we're just going to cross right over the top and start down in towards the center. This one is pointing towards the bottom of your paper, and it's a little bit rounder at the top than the other one. It's not quite as pointed. And then it stops. There's another petal in front of it, but that's okay. We'll erase out the other petals after. And then let's start with this next one that's pointing in this direction. Start in the middle and then curve your petal out. When it gets to the top, it does just this little curve, comes back and then straight down and into the center. So this particular blossom has 5 petals that we're drawing. We've drawn 3. These next 2 are facing us. So this petal, we're just gonna make like a cup shape coming in this direction and coming up, and then we're gonna curve down and back. And we're not gonna curve it all the way in because this petal actually come back up to this point and you're going to draw another cup shape coming in front. So this petal is almost like a bowl that's facing sideways. And this bottom one that's right here, we're just gonna draw the shape of it first. Comes out and around, just this line that comes down out of the back. Then it just curves up into the center. And then this is the line that makes it look like the petal is kind of cupped. So you're gonna bring a line around the front and then just make this little almost petal shape inside of here. So this is a folded petal. And I'm going to erase these lines just so you can see which petal is in front of the other. However, when we paint, we're going to be able to see these different areas. And then let's just erase this branch so that you can see what's going on here. Hopefully it makes it easier for you to see what's going on once those are erased. And then we're just going to draw a bunch of these little stamen. I'm just going to draw 4 or 5 of these circles in the middle. And then around them, you can draw tiny little smaller ones that are kind of surrounding them. And then just make sure you connect them with some kind of, we can just draw like a tube connecting them to this very center part. And it's hard to see what's going on in here, so we're just going to draw these little lines coming back in. So we have all these little shapes inside of it, and we're just anchoring them back into here with these petals. All right, you can erase any of these lines we used to draw this with. All right, now let's draw this big blossom that's right here. So I'm just going to draw the circle. I usually just try to measure it like it comes up higher than this. So I'm going to start the circle here. It's not coming all the way to the edge of the paper, but pretty close and higher than this petal. So kind of like an egg shape that's coming right in here. And the center of this one is about right here. So just draw kind of a circle indicating where that's coming from. And then from that circle, we're going to draw these petals. And again, there's 5 big petals on this. So from this middle part, we're going to draw this petal that's coming out to the side, and it's really big. So, and this one, you can't really see the bottom of it, and the top is pretty rounded. So we're just going to draw part of it here. It's turning towards the bottom and it actually kind of dips in and then comes back around almost like a heart, a really weird, a really strange shaped heart that's coming in. And then we have one that's pointing towards the bottom corner of our paper, comes to more of a point, curves, and then comes back around and into the center piece. And then let's draw this big one that's hiding kind of back around here. And it starts right about here. It's nice and round all the way around, and it's more pointed in this corner area, then just tucks behind this petal. Then there's one petal that's in here, and it's like these petals. It's more coming out towards us. So I'm going to still put this edge of it in, is right here. So it comes up and then wraps behind this petal, and it's coming in front of this one. Then just has like a little dip at the bottom. So this is what it looks like if I erase that back petal. And then there's one behind it that comes out to kind of a little point around and then just tucks behind this petal. We're going to draw, let's just draw 5 or 6 of these bigger circles, and they're almost coming in a row. You know, like there's 3 here, 3 here, and then we have these tiny little ones that are around the center. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I drew 8. You could do anywhere from 8 to like 11. And then they're going to be attached down in here. Let's just draw a line from these petals just showing the center part. I'm just making kind of like a curved line. And then attach these back into the center using 2 lines, so it's like a tube instead of a string. And we can see some leaves up here right above the right above the blossom. So let's just draw some of those in now so it's easier for us later. And let's just add this branch. And I'm just going to draw some of these leaves. There's just 1 behind this petal, 2, 1 in front of it, a little piece that's coming out in this direction, 1 that's coming out behind in that direction. These are pretty simple shapes to draw. So these will be just leaves that are kind of coming out from behind. These ones are going to be more in the background. So the focus will definitely be these blossoms right here. And then these ones are just going to recede into the background. They're coming from a branch that probably starts right here because we can see it poking out from behind this petal. And I would definitely refrain, don't put it right at this point or it's gonna look like it's growing out of this petal. So just put it up a little bit instead of down more. And this is going to be the branch that is holding this, that is actually above this blossom. It's not holding it up. It has kind of like a little cup shape at the end, and then it goes up and over, and again this little like heart or triangle shape. And then you can bring some leaves up and out of this. So just draw a line and curve it on top. So a line and curve it on top. This is coming in front. A line, curve it on top, a line, curve it on top, and then just this small little, there must be a bud or something in there. Now these petals are in the background, but they're really beautiful and they really add to this. So we can basically see 8 to 9 petals that are in here, but we can't see the center of them. They're pointed away from us, but they're still an important part of this whole composition. So we're going to start by putting 1 of these petals in, and I'm just going to put a little circle line right in here. Not directly across from the center of these, just a little bit up. And then from that, I'm going to draw the first petal, and it's going to come a little bit lower actually than this one, and curve back up. So our little teardrop shape. And then we can see one next to it has a little ruffle in it that's coming back. One that's coming straight over the top of that, and it's just this super thin petal. And then behind this one, there's a little one in between, and I'm just drawing a line down and almost like a shark fin, but then it curves back in. And then over behind these two petals, there's a big one, but it's really like circular and more rounded. Then we're gonna just jump here and there's just a round petal. So we're just gonna put a little smiley face hooking these two together. And then this is just a dark shape. I don't really know if this is like a branch back here. It must be. So we can just draw this tiny branch that's hooking it in. And then there's another one up here and just draw these circles, almost like a heart shape right there. And then there's a big petal coming out of this one. Comes out further than any of these. So it goes that way more than any of these other petals. And then there's just one above it, and that is it. That's all we can see of those other ones. So now take your eraser and erase any lines that you don't want to see. Hopefully you drew light enough that you can erase your lines. All right, once you finish drawing it, go ahead and erase all of those lines, and then we're gonna start painting it in. And don't worry, if yours looks different than mine, that is a good thing. If all of our paintings look the same, that would be pretty boring, and really this is just to teach you this technique and give you some confidence so that you can go and paint your own things. Let's set up our paints. If you're right-handed, go ahead and set up on the right side. If you're left-handed, set up on the left side. Get your water, your scratch piece of paper, your paper towel, your brushes, and I'm probably going to use this brush for the majority of this painting. All right, we're going to be painting from light to dark, and you'll see me making puddles in my tray that I'm going to be painting with. The reason that I do that is to keep the color consistent, and also it helps so that I don't have to stop and remix my colors. So we're going to paint light to dark, and we're going to start with these light pink petals. Go ahead and just paint these all with a light pink color. How you make the pink, I'll just mix it up in my tray. If you have a white plate, that works way better than these trays because as you can see, these trays kind of get stained by the paints that you use. So it looks like it's purple, but it's actually not purple. That's why your testing paper is so important. And this pink almost looks like it has a tiny bit of orange in it. So to make pink, you use red and a lot of water. And this pink looks like it might have a little bit of orange in it. So I'm just going to test it out. So just get some water, put it in your tray and add some red until you get this light pale pink color. So it might look dark in your tray, but then when you paint it on your paper, it's really light. So let's go ahead and paint in all of those petals. If you haven't painted before and this is your first time, some quick tips are to avoid scrubbing your paper. So that would mean like going over an area over and over again. And what that does is it starts to scrub your paper away. So once you've painted it, just move on to the next section. I'm even painting over these stems. The only thing to be careful of are these yellow parts in here. On this side, you can paint over them with this light pink, but on this side, I would try to keep, especially these center parts, these 6 bigger circles, try not to paint over them. On this side, it doesn't matter as much because they're in the shadows, but when you paint in this blossom, make sure you're not painting in these leaves that are behind these smaller ones on the top. They're so close to the petals, it's kind of tempting to just go over them. There's something in there, some kind of a petal, I don't know what. Let this layer dry and then we'll add another, then we will paint over the top of it and glaze over the top of it and make it a little bit darker in some of these shadow areas. If I take the same color and paint over it, it's going to look darker. Not a ton darker, but enough that it looks like a shadow. If it's not as dark as you want it to be, you can add more red. You could add a little bit of green. You could add a little bit brown, and you could definitely add some black. For this next layer, we're just gonna darken it up a little bit by adding some more red to our puddle. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of red, adding it to the puddle, test it on your paper to make sure it's not too much darker or the exact same color. And we're gonna add some of the shadows along these lighter petals. Make sure you have your paper towel because it's nice to be able to blot it and not have quite as much paint on your brush when you're shading. And there is a shadow underneath this petal right here. I wish I would have erased right there. Oh well. So there is a shadow and I'm just going to paint in a shadow along the top of this petal. And it's from this one above. And then where it wrinkles in, there is a little bit of a shadow. You can soften that shadow up by dipping your paintbrush in your water, then getting the water off of your brush and then just going over that edge really, really softly. You have to be careful because if the paint's not dry underneath, you can actually lift off the paint and then it's just going to turn white. And then your shadow does not look like a shadow. It just looks like a white part of your paper. Okay, there's another shadow. This petal is quite a bit darker around the edges, around this top edge, and then more within the center of it like this. So now I'm just rinsing my brush off, blotting it off, and just coming around that edge and softening it up. So rinse, blot, and then just come around the edge. So see, I just made it a little bit of a smoother transition in between those. And then this back petal is a lot darker, just using that same color, and I'm just going to paint the whole thing in. There's a little bit of a shadow on it. So I'm just painting that one with this darker color. This one is way darker, so we're just going to leave that until we have this darker color mixed up. This one is a tiny bit darker. Well, this whole area is darker, so I'm just going to paint this in. Also, this petal is a lot darker, so I'm going to use the same color that I used for this one back here. But this petal right here, we could definitely add some shading to it up along the top, and this will really separate these two petals. And I'm just going to bring this color back in, and really the top part of this whole branch right here is dark. So I'm just blotting my brush off. I'm not even rinsing it in the water now. I'm just blotting it off and then just coming along the edge and just smoothing it out so it has this really nice transition from light to dark, or gradation. I do want to add some shading on this one, but I don't want it to be as dark as that. So I need a little bit of separation between those two, so I'm just going to add a little bit of a shadow in here. And again, you can just blot your brush off. You don't have to dip it in the water. So these are just these lighter shadows, and there are some of these lighter shadows on the top of this petal, particularly inside of it, like in this bowl, in the top of this bowl shape that you created. So just start in there. Blot your brush off on your paper towel, and then this part of the petal gets darker as it comes down. So we're just kind of painting the bottom part of it, blotting off our brush, and then just coming along that edge and soaking some of that up. You can rinse your brush off and blot it off also, and just kind of go around the edge and smooth it out a little bit. All right, now we have most of this lighter shading. There's probably going to be a little bit on some of these petals as well, but they are so dark. So I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of your pink. If you ran out, just make some again, and you have your testing paper so you can test it out. And you can add a little bit of orange to this. I feel like there is a little bit, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of orange to my pink puddle. Okay, so this is a little bit darker. It might be pretty similar to the color I mixed up before. So I've just added more pink, more red to this. And I'm going to shade in some of these areas that still need to be darker, especially like down in here. This needs to be darker, so just come up and under. You can just paint in the whole area with it. And then these petals are pretty dark, and the inside is too. And there is a little bit of a highlight kind of along this edge. So I'm going to bring it out to that edge. And then once I get there to here, I'm going to rinse my brush off, blot it off, and then just smooth it out. So I still want a little bit of some light colors over there. This petal is the same, so it's darker along the top and then lighter along the bottom. So I'm just painting, rinsing my brush, blotting it off, and then I'm just coming back around this edge to still keep it light underneath. And in here, we don't want any light areas in here. This is going to be really shaded. So let's grab some of that red. This petal has a lot of sunlight along these edges of these petals. So the shading basically starts towards the center and comes out. So we're going to work petal by petal in this area. So we're just going to come out from the center. And then once we reach this outer edge, we're going to rinse off our brush, blot it off, or you can just blot it off. You don't have to rinse it. And then I'm just going to come around that edge to smooth out that transition a little bit. So again, grab that darker color. And then this one, I'm just going to make sure that I leave this top edge really light. But in this part, I want to come in with that darker red. I don't want it to be too watery. That seems a little bit watery, but... And you can keep this harsh line in some areas if you want. Or you can rinse your brush off, blot it off, and then just come along it and smooth it out a little bit. So this one is going to be darker in the center. And these are all really dark. So don't worry about painting over these bottom parts of these little tubes. But don't paint over the yellow part. So we're going to come out from the center and leave these edges nice and light. But around this petal, let's just add some shading. So I'm just going to come down and around, fill this part in nice and dark, rinse my brush off, blot it off, and then just come around this edge and just soften that up a little bit. Grab that same color, and let's work on this petal right here. So this petal actually is pretty dark right here. So I'm going to add some shading. And then the lightest part is along this side. So add some shading at the bottom and leave these top edges a little bit lighter. Rinse your brush off, blot it off with each of these steps. smooth that transition out around that. And then let's work inside of this area right here. Luckily, I still have a little bit mixed up. And we're gonna get darker than this. So, so don't worry if this looks like it's not. So I'm gonna carefully try to go around these middle parts with this color that's a little bit darker and just bring the center part up. Rinse my brush off, blot it off on my paper towel, and then just lightly come along these edges. And you can add a little bit of veins if you like, you know, this texture by smashing your brush and kind of pulling it out. Okay, now with this same color, we want to show that some of these petals are overlapping, and now might be a good time to do it since this color isn't too much darker. It won't have too much of a contrast. So on this petal, I'm just going to paint the top of it in and then continue this line as if it were going through this petal and add in this shadow. And then you want to do the same thing on the top of this petal. Just where this overlaps, we want it to show, and we want to see these really nice shadows that we get when that happens. And add another darker shadow under here. Having a hard time getting that part dark enough. Anywhere we kind of lost some shading, I'm just going to add some shadows back in. So at the top of this bowl, I'm just going to add a darker shadow. So I'm just using this red, this pink that's a little bit deeper to add these parts in. I'm adding more red to my puddle. And again, you can add a little bit of orange if you'd like to. I'm going to darken up this area back here. So we're just overlapping these, adding some contrast, adding some shadows. This is going to be my darkest shadow, so I'm going to add the most red to this puddle. And maybe a little bit of orange or a little green if you want it to be a lot darker, or brown or black. There's a ton of different ways to make it. I don't want to add too much orange since I didn't use very much. All right, so I have this darker color, and I'm just going to come in and paint in these darker areas, and I'm going to start over here. This is one of the darkest parts of the flower that I can see. This is one of the darkest petals, I guess, or shaded areas. If you get puddles of paint, just blot your brush off and you can come back in and change that. I'm going to come into this area right here. It's really dark, this petal that's behind this one. Along that edge, smooth it out along this edge. Also, if you're looking at it, anywhere you feel like it kind of, the petals come together a little bit too much, you can always grab your brush and add some of these shadows to break it apart a little bit. So be careful or you'll lighten up those areas. Just let them dry before you touch them up. There is going to be some darker areas in here. So just look, add any of the last shadows that you like to. Make sure your petals are separated. Usually at this point, I'll look at it and say, okay, where does it look like I have some definition and separation? And where does it look like I need a little bit more? So I'm just gonna add some of these darker areas in here. And this is a little bit darker right here. And this will be nice because it's gonna separate these two petals from each other. So now just add any more shadows you think need to be there. Separate your petals if you feel like they're coming together a little bit too much. This is the fun part. This is where I kind of feel like you're drawing instead of painting, just because of the detail that you can get. And the very last thing you want to do is this detail work. There also is something pink back in here, so might have to add some lighter. This is definitely darker than that petal. So this is glazing. This is where we are working with different levels of paint and adding shadows, basically. This is how to shade in watercolor. And you don't always have to soften up these edges. They can stay sharp and they can stay dark. So there is a shadow actually behind this petal of this petal. So I'm just going to continue that line through. So just keep working, keep darkening areas up. I'm going to let this dry a little bit while we work on the branch, and then we can come back in and we can add more separation, more petals, some more shading and things like that. But let's just leave it for a second and let's work on this branch. So to mix up a brown, I'm just putting some water in my tray over here, adding some brown to it and a little red. And you can see like how many times I tested that. So this is a lighter brown, which is fine. We want to start with the lighter color and then we'll add the shadow after. So let's go ahead and just add the brown anywhere we have a branch. Be careful when you get close to those petals. You do not want to overlap them. It's better just to leave a little white, dry area. Okay, while those branches dry, let's go ahead and mix up a green and let's paint in some of these areas up here. Some of these leaves have tons of pink on them, but we're not gonna get that detailed. So let me get a cleaner. And let's just go ahead and mix up this green. I'm gonna mix it right up here. So water sticks together, so I can mix two colors close to each other and they're fine. This green, however, needs to have a lot of yellow in it. It's really bright because these are young leaves, spring leaves. Okay, and then go ahead and paint in those leaves and be careful if your brown is still wet, then they're just going to bleed. Just like with the branches, make sure you are careful when you are painting next to the petals, especially if they're still wet. Then just leave white in between or just wait, or else you're going to have green petals, which maybe you want, but you probably don't. Okay, we're gonna let that green dry, and as it dries, we're going to add a darker shadow to the trunk. So I'm going to add more brown and a little bit of green and a little bit of red, maybe more green. And I'm just gonna put a shadow on this trunk. The shadow runs right through the middle of the trunk. So it's not really on one side or the other, it's like right in the middle. So we can see light areas on both sides. It's kind of a rough texture in here, and then it does run along the bottom of this branch. And same thing down here is just gonna run right along the middle of this branch. And you don't have to blend it, and it will run along the bottom of this one. We don't wanna get really detailed with these branches because they're not the important part of the painting. They're just there, they're kind of these anchors. You can add some more knots in here if you'd like to. While those are drying, and you can also add some pink like to the edge of these green leaves because there really is. There's like this really pretty pink color just coming along the edge of these. I'm just taking my pink and kind of coming along the edges of these leaves. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do any of this, but you know, it's totally up to you. All right, while we're waiting, we're still waiting for that pink to dry. Let's go ahead and add these yellow parts in. So there's a little bit of green in my yellow. So this is pretty light. That's gonna be a little bit too light even in some of these top areas. So to make it a little darker, you can add black. You could add a little orange. You can add a little bit of brown. So once you get that color, go ahead and paint in those circle areas and even in those little dots that are around. And you can dip, I guess, right into your yellow for those. So you're just getting like the most saturated color that you can find. You might even need to add a little bit of red just because it really is in the shadows in here. So you can add it to the little ones and to the big ones. And then to show this separation, what you can do is add there is a little bit of green in the center of these blossoms. So I'm just gonna add a ton of red, then with a little bit of green. And I don't want this to be black. Be careful because if you're not careful, it could look black. So I'm just going to paint in this center section, and I'm going to add lines in between all of these tubes if I can still see them. If you can't, you just kind of try to remember where they were. And you might want to wait till some of these are dry. This doesn't go all the way up though, it's really just kind of around the bottom. And in here, lighten it up just a little bit because you can't really see that green. It's not that dark. And you can just add some shading down in here coming up out of the center to these pieces. But really, these smaller ones just kind of disappear into the flower. You can't really see them. Now we can add any of the darkest shadows that we need to. If you feel like this needs to be darker, if you feel like anything in here needs to be darker, or even some things in here you need to change, like you could add some light pink for these pieces that are coming back to kind of give them some form, but wait till your yellows dry to do that. While these are drying, let's think about our background. All right, the background, you can do anything. Add blue, green would be nice and fresh. You just want to make sure it doesn't blend in too much with your branches. But the background in the picture is really, really busy. I'm going to simplify it a little bit in this one. And probably not make it blue because I don't know. I just don't have any other blue in this. So I think I'm going to go with a green background, and I'm going to mix it up in this large area in my tray so that I have enough to cover the whole area of the background. And it can be really light. It does not have to be a bold color. You could use black though, really. The background is fun. You can leave it as it is, but I like backgrounds. I think they're kind of fun too. A background can totally change the mood of a painting. Okay, when painting in your background, you can use your big brush to cover in the big areas and then grab your small brush for the small areas, or just use the side of your large brush. The key with your background, if you want it to be a flat color, you do have to paint it in pretty quickly. That's why I usually don't like to switch the brushes that I'm painting with. I'll just use like the corner of that brush, or just leave some white. It's okay to leave some areas unpainted. This is your painting, so you can do what you want to do with it. You'll notice I'm just leaving a white, kind of like a white little road around what I've painted. You can come right up next to it if you want, or you can do what I'm doing and just leave a white road. And you'll see even as big of a puddle as I mixed up, I'm running out. After you finish that, you can go ahead and add some more details in red if you would like. Any more shadows, anywhere you feel like things are kind of coming together a little bit too much. You could add some darker brown along this branch. Just be careful not to make it like the focal point of the painting, because it's not. You can just keep it nice and high key. So now look at it. You can add any other details to the flower that you would like. Any other shadows you feel like you missed. This is a good time to put those in. And sometimes you just need to take a little break and step away from it, and then you can come back in and fill in any of those areas that you feel like need a little bit more. Leave it like this. Make sure everything's dry before you take your tape off. I'm going to take my tape off and just see what it looks like with that border, as long as it's dry, which mine is. So take your tape off. Hopefully yours looks better than mine. This blue tape, I've had a ton of success with it not ripping my paper. But if your paper does rip when you're taking the tape off, just tear it from the opposite side. I had a little bit come off. All right, so we have some definition. I still feel like in here we're losing a little bit of it. So you can leave it like this. You can take your pen and you can do some outlining. It's totally up to you. The pen will make it look a little bit more illustrative. So I'm just gonna take a picture and then I'll show you what the pen looks like. Thank you so much for drawing and painting with me today. I hope you learned a little bit about watercolors and drawing these blossoms, and as well as glazing and blending watercolors together. Also, I hope you learned how to use your tray. Thank you so much for drawing and painting with me on Mr. Otter Studio. Also, we would love to see your paintings on Instagram. Once a month, I check our Facebook page. So you probably, if you want me to see what you're doing, post it on Instagram. I check that a lot more often. Have a wonderful day.